some folks online with us, and also we've got people here in person. And so thanks to Carrie for coordinating the webinar, folks. For those of you online, before I forget to say this, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll take those questions at the end. Or we have the capability to unmute you and then have you ask via audio if you prefer that option. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Heather Aldridge, and I am the brown bag host for the State Climate Office of North Carolina. So we're happy to have you all here with us today. We've got Jim Fox here with us today, who is the director of UNC Asheville's NEMAC, which stands for National Environmental Modeling and Analysis Center. And as that director, he serves as the team leader and PI for several different projects, including National Climate Assessment and the National Cohesive Fire Project, which is with USDA and DOI. And today, he's going to be talking to us about the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jim.
Thank you. So they've just mic'd me up. Can you see if people are hearing me okay on that? Okay, good. So just let me know if it's too loud, too soft. We'll move this up and down based on the comments. Well, welcome. I'd really like this to be a conversation. And any of you that do have your devices with you, if you kind of want to follow along, especially those on the call, as we get into the toolkit, I do have it pulled up. And so a lot of times, the best way to answer a question is instead of off of a slide to actually get into the site, pull it up, look at the topic that you're interested in, and see if we can actually get that to work as well, too. Also, just depending on where the conversation goes, I've got twice as many slides as what we're going to have time for. And so there's a little bit of background on the toolkit, but also want to talk to you about how we're implementing it. We've worked with 10 cities across the Southeast over the past year about building resilience and using this tool. And I know with a lot of this audience as well, too, we're going to be very interested in this balance between landscape resilience and community resilience, and really how those issues start getting to be kind of almost in competition with one another a little bit on the ground. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well, too. All sound good? Great. I do want to give a shout out to my team. This is the 8 of us that's here. We're actually interviewing for a new position right now, so there will be 9. But the next time you come to Asheville, make sure you come visit us at our downtown engagement site as well, too. We have a public engagement site in the Grove Arcade. It's open 5 days a week. Have a large vis wall there, a lot of ways to be interacting with the public, really providing this to groups of people at the scale that makes a difference to them. Also really wanted to give a lot of credit to a whole series of different partners. And so kind of our list of partners takes more than what you see on the screen, but just give you a good idea about what NEMAC is. We are basically an entrepreneurial startup. From 10 years ago, we don't receive any dollars from the university, from the state of North Carolina. And so we have all of our funding through active partnerships. And we are at the intersection between academia, government, and private enterprise. And we are not members of faculty. And so that's kind of who we are. A lot of the people that we partner with are on this slide. There are some real key themes for our group, and they are key themes for the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit as well, too. We were very proud, very happy as the president rolled out his climate challenge to the nation that through NOAA, they approached us to help put together the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. So NEMAC is the content manager and the technology provider for the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. We partner with NOAA, and the lead scientist at NOAA is Dr. David Herring. And we wanted to separate out the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit from the other online climate tools provided by the government. How many of you use climate.gov? Okay, so we provide a lot of the content for that. I mean, if you go onto the homepage of that and you see the little interactive sliders for looking at the metric, we created those. Climate.gov is kind of a news magazine type of approach, a little bit of the did you know and what's happening now. That we have then worked a lot with providing all the maps and other technical displays for the National Climate Assessment. And how many people have been onto the site for the National Climate Assessment? Okay, so you know National Climate Assessment goes a little bit one step further as it starts connecting the climate data to different sectors and starts going beyond the did you know to the why should I care, right? It starts getting into sectors and regions. And the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit then attempts to go that next step further. So beyond the did you know and the why should I care, what we're trying to do is provide a framework for people to be able to take steps for resilience to answer the question, what can we do about it? So when you start then asking those questions, there are several different metrics. We want to provide this stuff in leading edge web technologies so it competes with other kind of entertainment. So we want it to be a very usable suite of technologies. We don't want people to get frustrated with not being able to find what they want, not being able to navigate, not being able to rapidly pull up data through the web map viewer. And so that's kind of the first metric is, usable. The second U is useful data. Can we actually provide really useful climate information in a format that they can integrate it with the things that they care about? But the most important U is the one I've highlighted in red, and that's used, right? I think any of us, as we create products for groups of users, that if over the course of time that we don't see it being used, we fail. So you can do the other ones, useful and usable, but if you're not actually seeing metrics for people actually using it for the purpose that you've designed it for and actually growing that base, then you've really lost. So that's what we're really trying to do. And therefore, we're really trying to get to that end decision maker to be really looking at, okay, are you actually using it to take action? So this is a little bit of a view to how all those pieces come together. We as scientists really love our data, our blue ovals about the what do we know, and we're very proud of a lot of our tools that we create at NEMAC. We provide a lot of data to people. But if you can't connect that to this green oval, then people really aren't looking at it besides, oh, well, that's interesting. You have to connect to where people make their decisions around, and that's based on this value set of what do they care about. And so you'll see in the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit, we are very purposeful about looking at a climate stressor and looking at what it's impacting and separating out those pieces. Also, when you start looking at starting to take action, people want to be looking at the future. What can happen? How do you deal with all those pieces? And you have to look at all those before you can actually get over to this other purple oval, which is what are we willing to do about it? And we're going to be having an interesting conversation today, but I would dare say that I'm really not dealing with key stakeholders or decision makers in this room, because I'm really not asking you these two key questions that deal with what we call the two big R's. Are you willing to accept responsibility, and are you willing to assign resources to actually take action? And so a lot of times we get groups of people together, and I think all of you have participated in these. We get people to come together and say, oh, well, will you help us make this suite of maps? Will you give us your input about, tell us what's important and all? Well, they might participate that far, but then if you ask them to come back and say, okay, now based on your input, are you willing to use that map to do this? Accept responsibility and assign resources, you'll get a much smaller group of people that are actually there. A lot of people will tell you what they think. Not very many people will then vote with their wallet to actually say, well, I actually believe what I think. So that's where we're at. There's a lot of different ways that we can look at resilience, but this is the official government and international definition when you start looking at climate resilience. So I wanted to just kind of put that up for everybody to look and read at, nod. It's a little bit more than bouncing back. And so it's also, don't confuse resilience with sustainability. Sustainability establishes one kind of baseline, resilience goes one step beyond that. So we are looking to be going the step beyond sustainable to actually resilient. So to introduce you to the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit, I really like to use this quote from David Herring. He is the program manager. He is the lead scientist at NOAA that is leading this effort. And as we started going down, he made this very wonderful analogy, I thought. He said, it's one thing to build a kitchen, it's another to teach people how to cook and give them good recipes. So if you think about, you know, a kitchen in a home, and think of one that you've got fond memories of. It's probably not the kitchen that you went through on the home tour that was this beautifully, you know, crafted kitchen. I think the kitchens that most of us really think in the adding value is probably one where we've really shared a wonderful experience with people over a great meal, right? So the kitchen is one of those vehicles, one of those tools. It's another thing to have people that know how to really use that kitchen to really create that wonderful meal that we can all share and benefit from. And so when you think about a toolkit, that we're not so much interested in what the tools or the pots and pans are in the kitchen, is how do you use those tools to really create an end result that you're interested in. Does that make sense? Okay. So you can see the whole website is designed around that reality, and this is a screenshot of the homepage. So you can see on the whole big first part of the screen that you get into that we highlight the 5 steps to resilience. That as you move through these, we call these the getting started steps. It's the first tab at the top of the page. And it is that basically how do I move from addressing, you know, looking at what the problem is to determining vulnerabilities and moving through the 5 steps. You could see then the second tab up there, taking action case studies. These are stories of Americans like you and I that are actually using these steps, this data, these tools to build resilience. We've got 100 case studies in there right now. We're adding more all the time. But you can also see basically videos highlighting those case studies there as well too. So if you want to get a little bit of an idea, these are usually about a 1 to 2 minute video that gets into that as well, but they're actually embedded in each of the case studies. So the whole part of the design is not, you're not seeing a data tab up here. You're not saying, oh, well, let me go ahead and jump right into a map or anything. But it is around the idea of the steps for resilience and looking at people, best practices from them about how they approach it. So again, the logic is you look at these 5 steps for building resilience, that the first step is really about the did you know, the second step is the why should I care, assessing vulnerability. The following 3 steps are what can we do about it. Now, in our national courts, it's obvious that we are all not at step 5, and that's okay. That we have lots of case studies where people are just starting, they've just done step 1, or they've gone to step 2. What's happening is, by and large, across our nation, we are a little bit stuck at step 2, that we are struggling to find ways to get into step 3. And we're trying to find ways for people to be moving from a vulnerability assessment suite of maps that are showing what are areas that are most important to conserve or to work with, and now starting to say, oh, you know, what are some options we have to actually build resilience? And so just had a wonderful story shared with me about actually a great example of how we're moving into step 3 with some pieces, and it's around fire here in the Southeast. And one of our local centers here is helping to move from assessing a vulnerability and using these maps to actually putting stuff on the ground and moving ahead through steps 3, 4, and 5. I think that's the real exciting part about where our dialogue has gotten to over the past 5 years, because we have now a lot more people that are moving through this. And so I'm very hopeful about how our national conversation is going, and we hope this tool will keep moving in that direction. So when you see this, then you can go in and you see I've highlighted taking action case studies. And if you've got 100 of these, you really don't want to necessarily have to scroll through 100 case studies and say, oh, well, that's a nice picture. Let me read about this. There's a little bit more. No. So what we have is we have ways to actually filter at the top. So you can filter by a major topic, by these 5 steps for resilience, or by the region of the nation that you're in. And it will start giving you a shorter list of these case studies that are actually applicable to what you're looking for. And so you can see then as you pull up one of these case studies that this one then starts highlighting how all this information is cross-referenced to one another. You're in a case study. This is actually in a food resilience piece. You can actually see that the topic here is food resilience and food production. That here's a list of tools that are there that people are actually using to build resilience. And so you can click on any one of those. You can't read that. There's one of them called Cropscape, which gives you a direct online viewer for the National Cropland Data Layers, the U.S. Drought Portal for an active reading of where drought is. There is a pasture, rangeland, and forage decision support tool. So again, we're not trying to recreate great resources. We're trying to point people to those as well, too. You can then see that there are other links to partners as well as key data sets that are used. A lot of the case studies have videos that support them, so you can see the little story and how it relates visually as well. As you scroll down this page, you then have the opportunity to jump right into the Climate Explorer. So this is an integrated map viewer that is linked by a permalink. So does anybody know what a permalink is? Let's explore that together. So I'm going to jump out of the presentation, and I'm going to jump into taking action case study. I'm actually live for those of you watching now on the site, so if you want to follow along. And just since we're in the Southeast, let's put a filter on for Southeast. And maybe, let's just go over here since I was talking about food. Okay, so I only have 2 case studies that are right here, but let's just go ahead and look at this one and see how it works. So this is a farmer in Alabama, and you can see that he approached his state climatologist, has actually got some very useful information, and has actually designed his farm around a much more resilient farming system. And so you can see that every story leads with this topic of stressors and impacts. What are the main climate stressors this farmer's worried about? What is it impacting? What are the actions that he's taking? This story about improving the odds is there. How is he making decisions based on some of these climate outlooks? And so now you can see that we've got embedded Climate Explorer here. So a permalink allows you to click on that. It instantly goes out and launches Climate Explorer. So Climate Explorer is a national tool, but what it does is it goes ahead and launches and builds the information in this viewer exactly the way it's captured in the case study. Now you're actually in an interactive Explorer sitting through here, and you can see that this then works the way you expect most map viewers to work. I can zoom out and start seeing more information. I do want to point out that these are national data layers, and we're getting fairly good response time for a national raster data set. So we've been able to optimize how these feeds are occurring. Also, we are not providing the web services. NEMAC is not. We are now working with the federal government through the National Geoportal for all of these web layers to actually be coming in. One tool that we have created is the multigraph. And so you can start then clicking on different climate stations nationwide. There's 4,000 of these. And this is history of precipitation. You can see the red curve is what's an average precipitation. The dark red areas are showing what's actually happening. You can see that years that are below the red line are periods of drought. That very steep, if I do this with a WebEx, is periods of intense precipitation. And you can start then seeing, regional extent. Now, this is multigraph. This is an open source piece of software that we've developed, but you can interactively scale this. I'm just moving the mouse cursor, and then I can drag it. I can change vertical scale and all as well, too. If I'm asking a question that also includes temperature, I can pull up the temperature feeds for those as well, too. This is updated every night. So we have up-to-date climate information at 4,000 stations back for 100 years. So you can start saying, what is my long-term reality? The other side of the viewer is then your map layers. This is the spatial extent. You can actually see that we've got the national cropland layer on here. Well, how does this actually compare to the current drought? Well, you can see that this is starting to obscure, so with transparency, I can actually then set this up to view it the way that I want to. Say I want to zoom out a little bit more and saying how these things actually start impacting the state of North Carolina. Here's the true benefit of a permalink, that if this screen is now exactly the way that I like it, I can capture that web address with my permalink, send it to a friend. I can do this without doing that. They can paste it into their browser. And it will pull up Climate Explorer on their machine, exactly zoomed in, exactly looking at the way that you're looking at your screen. Sure. So the information icon gives you two pieces of information. It gives you the legend, which you're hoping to see what the colors are, but more importantly, it also gives you where you can get this information yourself. So we are providing ways so that, oh, well, you'd like that. You can go right here, and this will take you directly to the U.S. Drought Monitor. You can get this live feed, or you can get the shapefile for this as well here too. Does that answer your question? Okay, you bet. Okay. So does everybody understand kind of that philosophy between case studies and actually interacting with it yourself? Okay. So since I gave you the examples, I don't need to go through these slides. If you want to just go in here and launch Climate Explorer, there is a whole series of background information. What is the climate data set that we've got coming into here? How's that being developed and delivered? How do you actually navigate the map? Those sort of pieces here as well, too. I did want to point out that we are on purpose giving people two big pieces of information. You can either pull up climate stressor data sets, or you can pull up people and assets impacted. And so we're really trying to get people to go toward this idea of cause and effect and connecting the climate stressor to the things we care about. You can also go right up here and you see where it says coastal flood risk. You can then pull this down and you can change this to any of the 8 topics that are in there right now, and it will pull up data layers that are specific to that topic. So you're not having to look at hundreds of data layers. They're ones that are specifically for that specific topic. And I talked about that and gave you the demonstration. You asked the question exactly the right way, actually. So I'll go ahead and pay you for the question. Yeah, exactly. You can see that, with this historical data, where the 4,000 stations are and all that works as well, too. Well, why would those sort of pieces be important? Well, this is from the case study around Tuckerton, New Jersey, which was one of the main areas where Hurricane Sandy came in. And there is a restaurant owner that, was looking to rebuild his restaurant and wanted to know, should I rebuild? And if so, how high a piling should I be putting my restaurant on so I don't have to be doing this again? Well, one of the first questions he asked was, well, was this due to the extreme precipitation from Hurricane Sandy? And the answer is no. That actually, Hurricane Sandy, the precipitation bump you can see is the vertical increase that's highlighted by the circle. But actually, the previous year, there was a much greater vertical bump due to the previous year hurricane, but it did not cause any damage there. The damage was storm surge. It was the timing of that hurricane, high tide, the amount of water it was pushing as well, too. So it allowed that restaurant owner to understand that, no, it wasn't the water falling out of the sky. It was the water that was getting pushed in from the ocean that was the problem. That was the stressor. You can see then tools work the same way. We have over 200 tools that people have nominated that are in here. So we love to have 200 tools. There's something wrong with this math, though. Okay? We have 100 case studies. We have 200 tools. We've had these tools out here, and we've asked each of the people that nominated the tools to provide us a case study. Who's actually using the tool to build resilience? And unfortunately, our professional community is a little bit better about building tools than actually getting people to use them. So we're in rapid prototyping. By the time November comes around, if those people that nominated the tools do not have case studies, 100 of these tools are going to be coming off the site. We are not a Home Depot where anybody can come in and just look at tools. We're more a place where, okay, if you can show me how to use the tool, I might consider buying it, right? Okay, so that's again the philosophy. You can again filter how to get into it. No, not at all. So the process is the, oh, right. Yeah, the question is it too late to add a tool? Not at all. In fact, we've just added 3 major topics in the past 2 months, transportation, energy, and tribal nations. And we are bringing in tools for each of them along with case studies. But there is a contact link right up on the top that if you would like to nominate a tool or a case study or give us any sort of feedback, you send us an email and we get in contact with you. We have templates that we'll send you a template. Can you answer these questions for us in this format? Then we'll probably call you and then it shows up. And so, no, we're very much in rapid prototyping. How can we actually create this to be the most useful? We know that we've been federal government centric so far. And so what we're really trying to do with these sorts of talks is encourage people to have good tools and good examples of stuff being used to go ahead and nominate those, and we'll be putting those in as well, too. We would like to have that better ratio and actually have a lot of case studies for one tool rather than the other way around, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the question was, do most of the federally nominated tools have case studies? And no, they actually don't. So this is actually some of our worst offenders. Well, you can understand how it's come about. Yeah, exactly. And also, I think a lot of people that work at federal agencies are a little bit tired about, having to respond to the next ask, right? There was this whole national climate assessment that came out, get involved with that. now here's the new U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. Wait a minute. Now I'm doing something beyond my normal job as well, too. So it's very possible that a lot of these tools are very useful and used. We just don't have the way to actually link into those. And so this is very much an iterative learning process right now. We are in the process of creating phase 1.5 of this. We've been very much listening to people. And there's been some updates that have already been made, like adding a lot of topics, but you are going to be seeing a little bit more responsive design coming out by the end of this year as well. So, you can also dive into this around topics. So this is diving into it around human health that, you can say, oh, well, what's the did you know part about this? But it will allow you then to actually look at how you can use these steps to actually build resilience within the specific topic area. So how do you actually apply these to maybe a healthcare focus? I did want to point out that we have links to expertise. And so I want to jump out again and see if we get it right through that. So I'm going to go into the expertise and find experts. And so the first thing that comes up are state climatologist office. And so North Carolina, Brian Boyles, view their website. You can go into NOAA offices. So, where are the RESIS? Southeast Regional Climate Center. Anybody know where that is? Oh, yeah, okay. USDA, regional climate hubs. I think there's one of those around here too. Yeah. Department of Interior. Might even be somebody in the room. There's no contact name for that provided right now, so you have to view the website. So if there is a better source of information you'd like to supply to us, because obviously this is not responding real well. Okay. So, yeah, that's how that works. I mean, obviously, we're just trying to provide ways to get people to be really able to find the person they ought to be talking to, okay? Really important concept. Why did I pull this up? We talk about trusted sources of information. Through the website, we're trying to provide a lot of the steps to resilience, a lot of the resources. That's one trusted source of information. But really, when it comes down to it, the other trusted source of information then becomes you, right? If I'm going to replace the roof on my house, instead of going and just Googling roof repair, what am I more likely to do? Well, if I know a neighbor that's just recently replaced their roof, I'm going to go talk to them. Oh, did you have a good experience? How much did you have to pay? What was that process like? The same way, people trust neighbors, people locally, a lot more than the federal government showing up and saying, in Washington, I'm here to help you, right? So we're trying to provide that link here as well, too. It's a resource, but we want to find that person you can contact locally to actually dig in. Right? So I just want to hit a couple more things. I'm going to open up the conversation. I do want to talk just a minute about this group. So are you all aware of sustainability directors? So these are people that work at most cities, and cities have been looking at sustainability now for about 10 years, and they are our avenue in for talking about climate adaptation. They are the easiest point to actually get into most cities, start having a conversation about building climate adaptation plans. So the national organization is USDN, but the regional one is the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network. And we've worked with them over the past year as we've been working on this to try to be a listening group. Are we doing this the right way? We're providing information for you guys to actually be applying this on the ground. So just kind of want to show you this graphic. This is modified from Scott Shuford's work. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Scott Shuford, but he used to be the city planner in Asheville, which is when I got to meet him. As he left that job, he then worked with NOAA and us to put out the American Planning Association Climate and Energy Guide. He is now the main planner in Fayetteville, North Carolina, but great advocate of climate into the planning space. And I think he does a great job of kind of speaking their language. And so planners use a series of plans, and they fit then with kind of this move that we've been making on our side as well, too, that 8 years ago, we worked with our local emergency managers in Asheville to put together a multi-hazard risk tool for Buncombe County that allowed them to look at flooding and wildfire and landslides and how do I actually respond to that. Well, 4 years ago, we worked with our Regional Council of Governments to put together a sustainability report card, and that actually expanded to the Mountain Resource Commission, the Vitality Index, to be looking at that. But where the conversation is now going is we're working with the city of Asheville to be putting together their whole climate adaptation plan as a main part of not only their comprehensive plan, but an adaptation and recovery plan. So you can go out, cities of Baltimore, New York, cities in California. They're all being very progressive in this. We actually met with the city of Raleigh yesterday morning on their food resilience plan and how that links into this. So this is where the conversation is going. And it ties into these steps. I think I'm going to stop there and just open it up for conversations. Any questions that have come in? We can dig deep into this some other time, but I've got a few slides that talks about what makes the Southeast unique versus the rest of the nation. But I think we might benefit more from us having a conversation for the people that are here. What have you heard? What would you like to talk about? Yeah. Well, yes and no. So we do use Google Analytics on there, and so we have an idea of major sectors and how many times people are returning. We also have an idea of how deep they dig in. And so one way that we're using the analytics is to actually be pulling kind of tools into the spotlight. It's as more people actually go on, dig as far as a tool, if they actually go off of our landing page, it points to the tool and actually goes to the tool site. And that's a key analytic for us because people then seem to be like, oh, this could be useful to me. And so then we use that to nominate that tool to be more on the home page as something that might be useful. We're not real good about how to ask those questions yet. So if you've got some ideas, we'd love to hear them. But that's No. In fact, our prime audience are planners. In other words, if you look at a company, we're not looking at the CEO or the CIO or even the COO, right? What we're looking for are the people the next layer down that actually, once the CEO says go do something, they actually have to implement. Well, the same thing in cities. You know, elected officials say, oh, that's a great idea. Who do they turn to? Well, city staff, county staff, right? Regional councils of governments. You know, people that actually have to then work with the data, go through these steps of resilience to actually put out a product, deliver something back to those people that are actually making the decisions as well, too. So, no, it's not aimed at federal agencies at all, even though we're ingesting a lot of their information. The audience is exactly that other group. we're very interested in the general public coming in, but I think, the general public by and large comes first into something like climate.gov, kind of the did you know, and then as they're pointed there by different other people, they do come into the Climate Resilience Toolkit, but more people that are using this tool are really trying to get to those higher level questions. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Okay. So the question was who are the final users of the toolkit? I was at a one-day workshop in Ann Arbor, Michigan on Tuesday. And so Ann Arbor is the site of the Great Lakes RESA that kind of works in that region. And if you go to, find your local expert, a lot of people approach that RESA. So one thing we're trying to figure out through those points of contact is to say, okay, well, who's asking for this? So we're going to be running a 3-day workshop for a couple small cities up in northern Michigan next month to actually be using the toolkit in partnership with RESA for working through each of those steps that we have in there. So we've got 5 general steps. There's actually 32 kind of sub-steps within that, but we are actually going to be working with them. We did that in Maine. Like I said, we did this for these 10 cities across the Southeast as well, too. So we're really trying to deal with that group of end users to see, are we actually meeting their needs? So that's really kind of who we're looking at primarily first. Yes. They've basically been applying for, and the deal that we're making with them is, okay, we'll run a workshop, but you have to be guinea pigs and provide us very active feedback to help improve this tool as well, too. So they're not paying with dollars, but they're certainly paying other ways for us right now. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so the question is off the analytics, do we see a pattern? That question comes up pretty often as I'm giving this. How can I say this the right way? There are 2 main colors of states, and there's one color of state that has about a 75% use versus the other color of state. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, how do you get people to use the steps? How do you articulate? Even how do you get them to even be looking at best practices, I think, as well, too. So this is on the overview page of the Getting Started steps. We did not invent the 5 steps. This is just 12 selected references out of about 30 that are out there. But what we have tried to do based on feedback is take the mystery out of why are there 12, why are there 30, and combine those to say, okay, as a general frame, there's 5 basic steps. Now, like preparing for climate impacts lessons from the front lines, the Kresge Foundation, I think they have 8 steps. Department of Transportation, I think, has 12 steps. There's some great work that's come out of the European community. I think most of us know that Europe's about 10 years ahead of us. We want to benchmark against people that really have kind of done a lot of this work. There's some really excellent work for there. So we try to give, links into that as well, too. I don't think there's anything magic about that. But the one feedback that we have gotten and that we are really upgrading, and now this phase 1.5 is coming out, is a lot more detail on those steps, because people are really wanting some hand-holding of, okay, how do I do this next piece and how do I find that? So we are putting a lot more detail into that. But that was directly based on feedback we're getting from users. That's where we're really trying to improve this. It's why it's in rapid prototyping. Here's what we thought would work. Simple's good. Well, simple's okay. But, take the simple and point to the more details. That's actually what I want as well. Yes. Very much so. So we've worked with the Forest Service. Okay, so the question was, is steps for resilience or just building on risk assessments in the years? Working with the Forest Service and Dr. Danny Lee there, we've actually run a lot of workshops, and actually one here in the Southeast using a risk analysis process called CRAFT, Comparative Risk Analysis Framework and Tools. If you go into CRAFT, you'll see a very great similarity to these 5 steps as well, too. But yes, that's exactly right, that when you look at steps for resilience, when you get down to step 4, it starts talking about, how I prioritize and do risk, right? Well, now that's risk analysis. And you have to do these other steps to prepare before you can actually use. It's actually very interesting. It's also what we found to be the most misused word in our conversation is risk. But a lot of times people are actually looking at the concept of where am I exposed to a hazard? Or, here's a sensitive population. But you have to, take exposure and sensitivity and adaptive capacity all together before you get to vulnerability. And then you have to get vulnerability and you have to start looking at probabilities before you actually get to risk. So a lot of times when people have the even exposure conversation, they use the word risk. So we're actually having to pull people back a little bit and saying, well, you really want to talk about risk, here's a better conversation. It's a great, yeah, you're exactly right. Yes. Yes. Okay, so I think the general question is how do you do the very difficult work of resilience, and how do you actually apply it into the space that the decision is around? Because one space, I mentioned we were at Raleigh yesterday, if you look at food resilience, you're going to be looking at, concepts of supply chains and where's your food coming from. Well, you have to then have a good understanding of, what the inputs are into the system. So you're looking at complex systems, and then you're looking at linkages into complex systems. And so one way that we have tried to get people across the Southeast to look at that. I'm just going to try to find the slide real quick. So I'll make this unique. So one way we can start looking at that is the idea of the past. And ask people, okay, let's just not look at this as a metric. And so these are climate at a glance profiles. This is for Atlanta, Georgia. And if you look at this, this is things like drought, total precip, cooling degree days, heating degree days. And so we gave the 10 cities that were participating each of these and had them compare to similar cities across the Southeast. Well, what's the same, what's different? Well, you know where the conversation went to was it's not necessarily the trend, even though some of these trends are interesting. It's actually the frequency and severity of the bars, right? Because that starts getting into crossing critical thresholds. You know, oh, in the city of Asheville, we crossed the threshold in 2004 with a major flood. Well, it's linked with a major precipitation event, but the planners in Asheville want to know, well, how often are we going to get that level of flood? You know, when you start looking then at, you know, cooling degree days and heating degree days, you start looking at, okay, heat waves. And when do you start getting to really critical points when we don't even have the capacity to provide enough cooling in the power system? And then you start looking at sensitive populations and saying this is not necessarily really exposure, it's really sensitivity. And through the 14 slides I just went through about what makes the Southeast unique, the Southeast is a lot more sensitive than other regions. We're demographically more stressed than other regions. And so we have the ability to be crossing thresholds for greater amounts of our population in other areas. And so I think the conversation starts getting to, let's take a look at the past. Let's look at this variability question. Let's look at these climate projections about where things are going in general, but let's add the variability on top of those general curves and saying, where is the change in our critical thresholds occurring? Because that's where people usually die or, you know, lose a lot of property or
has left the conference.
Yeah, I think that it is very much from a practical application point of view, but I think it's also important for a university research audience to realize as well, too, that as we start building capacity and we start catching up to like the European Union, that the critical questions that are out there are like the ones that you have, right? We've got a better understanding of exposure and, you know, ideas behind where the exposure is. Vulnerabilities, we've also started really building a great deal of knowledge and all around. But as we're entering into this third step of looking at options and strategies, those really start getting linked to these thresholds. And I'm agreeing with you that not nearly enough research has been done across sectors, across regions, to be looking at that issue. And then you get to this other concept we talked about risk. Well, you have to have an understanding of those before you can truly look at this risk analysis sort of piece as well, too. So I think, you know, our ability to be increasing our research as we're moving ahead with these challenges is really a great place for, you know, university research to really be coming in, is moving ahead in these steps to resilience. So I think it's perfect work that really needs to be done. Are there any questions that have come in on the chat? Okay, good. Yes. Mhm. Yes, and so the question is how do you enter into the toolkit and can you get this information directly? Yes, you can do that. What we typically find from a user, though, is the ability to just go through the steps that you talked about, is this connect the dots, right? And end users sometimes don't know some of those beginning questions. And so that is the other shortfall that's occurring out there right now is we don't have enough experts in our nation that can be really helping people lead them through the steps and doing that next higher level of work. So we can create the tools or the products, but providing the services to those end users is a shortfall. And it's then difficult for those of us in the room, especially those of you younger in the room, to be planning your career around saying, okay, what is the long-term view of, a nice paying job for providing those services? Because that then gets caught into this political debate that we, jokingly laughed about the two different colors of states. But we have to be moving the discourse in our nation to, what can we do about it, away from the, is there actually a problem? The really hopeful thing is, though, in even the red states, at a municipality level and at a company level, state politics are not changing those people asking those questions. We're currently working with 5 cities across the state of North Carolina. Huntsville, Alabama, we're working with. If you are responsible for looking after your local citizens' resources and making sure that your city is resilient and going to be there, be a nice place to live and a good place to work, they're caring about this. And so there is some sort of disconnect that's happening, at different levels of government. And I do think that there is a pretty strong career path for providing climate services for that next generation coming up. And it's really, what we're trying to do at NEMAC. If you actually look back at the faces of NEMAC, 5 of the 8 members of our group are younger than my son is. 4 of them were actually students at UNC Asheville that work for us as that and are actively doing this work. I very firmly believe this is a great business opportunity. We've also launched a commercial LLC. A couple of people have left our group and actually established a commercial side, and they're doing this and getting paid to be doing it as well. Yeah. So the question is there a path forward? And I definitely think that there is. I mean, NOAA. You have to remember that NOAA is part of the Department of Commerce, and so the biggest words that are coming out around the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit are public-private partnerships, and so we are partnering with several large private companies on some of these pieces as well too. But you brought up the Adaptation Forum in St. Louis. If you look at people that are applying this, there are the RISAs, there are the, LCCs and groups, but there are the AECOMs and others, and they are making a lot of money about doing these sorts of studies out there right now. I mean, AECOM presented maybe 8 presentations in St. Louis. And, I went up and said, well, what did Seattle pay you for this? And what did Jacksonville pay you for that? And things. They're getting $1 million a study. Well, exactly. The whole reinsurance thing. I mean, as soon as we put out the feed for the GHCN daily station data on Climate Explorer, within a week of the national launch, we got an email from 2 reinsurance agencies, and we have the link into that feed because we've created all of this open source, right? Taxpayers have paid for this, and so yeah, they already said, "Can we have the feed?" Yep, here it is. All the software's in GitHub. The analytics off of GitHub are even more interesting than the others about people that are actually getting the data and getting the tools to actually use it themselves. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. So I think, the question is how do foundations play in this to start getting a broader reach? So that was actually the main purpose of the meeting up in Ann Arbor on Tuesday. In the room was the Kresge Foundation, but also the American Society of Adaptation Professionals and EcoAdapt with Fake. And so we're really asking the question is, okay, between the federal government, these nonprofits, the foundations, and then the local communities. So there were sustainability officers there from Ann Arbor, Berkeley, California, Boulder, Colorado, and Columbus, Ohio as well too. So the question is how do we start building that capacity of our community to actually get this to be working? And so it does take these partnerships, right? And we're starting to see, who are the players in the partnerships. Rockefeller, Kresge, are 2 of the big foundations. There are several different startups now. There's ACO, American Climate Change Officers. You're starting to see groups of people coming together and saying, we're going to be doing this, and here's why we're going to be doing it. Yeah. So under expertise, you not only have find experts, we've got training courses as well too. So what we're doing is we're trying to get people to kind of come into baseline training that you can do either online or you don't have to pay for. And then as people approach us and saying, well, I did this, can I also do that? We try to point them to some free resources and all. Again, the shortfall is not some of the products or the process, it's bodies, right? Is how do you provide the right people to be providing that training or very much tailored training for what exactly they're looking for or where they're at in the step. So, yeah, I don't have the answer to that one besides, I think everybody in the room, we're interested in how do we build capacity in this sector. And I think that that's the very interesting part about, if you look at weather services 25 years ago, that was a conversation that was happening around weather 25 years ago. And you now look at how that whole community provides that in a lot of jobs and everything. We're at that point in the conversation about climate services right now. And I think we're all trying to figure out how does that come together, How do I make a living and also make a difference? So I think most of us in the room, a little bit more here because of passion for making a difference, but we're definitely have to put food on the table and, house over our head and everything as well too. So we have to keep the good people that are making a difference here with meaningful salaries. So, big news, we have now established a Climate Resilience Center in Asheville. It's going to be opening up at the end of the year. It's called the Collider, 20,000 square foot space. NEMAC is going to be moving our space out of the Grove Arcade, going to be the anchor tenant in there. But the American Society of Climate Change Officers is opening their head office there. Acclimatize is opening up their major climate company in the UK. They're opening up their US office in Asheville. Riverside Technologies opening up a branch office in Asheville. So we are actively betting that Asheville will be a center for doing climate services. So if you like the idea of living in Asheville, you want to be looking at that, there is a new opportunity for how do we figure out this problem together. It's called the Collider. It's the idea of people working on this stuff kind of coming in and colliding together. I did not come up with the name. It's the top floor of the Wells Fargo building, a very interesting story. The building was bought by a company out of Miami called Oceanside Resorts. And so they actually bought the building thinking they were going to tear down the building and put in a hotel. So there's this hotel boom in Asheville. And as the CEO of the company, her name's Claire Callan, came in, we started meeting with her and started talking about vulnerability resilience. She was actually looking at buying another hotel property in Miami. And we just worked with her a little bit of the steps about what her portfolio already looked like and whether it would make sense for her portfolio to have another piece of property with a certain amount of risk. She decided not to buy that property, but she said, wow, what a great business opportunity. If I am asking this question, how many more companies or whatever are going to be asking this as well too? So she's invested $2 million to completely renovate the top floor of the Wells Fargo building. She's putting it into LEED status. And then a local person that's really been very supportive of this, his name's Matt Pearsall, is putting in $500,000 to kind of leverage that risk as well too. So we've got basically some people with some fairly deep pockets that are saying the business opportunity that are, really making it so that people like me, I'm not paying any more for rent by moving into that space. But there's going to be a space for a meeting room for 300 people, a lot of hot offices for 1 or 2 people, that are interested in experimenting in the space. Like I said, these different companies that are already coming. Yeah. I didn't mean to turn that into an advertisement, but conversation came to be that way. Since we are the site of the nation's Center for Climate and Weather Data at NCEI, it's just a natural extension for us. We've been trying to do this for about 6 years. Yes.
I work in more of a rural area. I'm thinking about farmers, and maybe a farmer just they look to the farmers system. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I don't know if you have to choose one versus another, but if you look at food resilience, there are certain ways to look at this. There's a great book that's come out that's been written by Laura Linnett on food resilience, and she actually uses exactly these steps for resilience. She's just retired as a professor at Warren Wilson College, but we're partnering with her. She was actually the one in the room with me with the city of Raleigh on looking at food resilience. And so you start looking at ideas of food sheds. It's kind of like a watershed, but where does your food come from? She's got 28 case studies in her book, about farmers, about how they're positioning themselves to not only to be more resilient, but to be close to people that are then willing to pay for their product as well too. There's a subdivision that's gone in, I forget, I think it's in Virginia, but they basically kept a certain number of acres aside and actually then hired their local farmer. And so everybody that lives in that village now has access to that local farmer and all the produce. So he's earning a living, but he's providing them with a locally resilient food program as well too. There's just numerous studies, but I mean, when you look at resilience, you have to start looking at moving beyond our current food system of massive operations around a single crop to a lot more multi-crops, and how you maintain, your resilience around kind of not betting the farm on one crop. But it's a great book. I would really recommend it. It's just recently come out. Well, the author's name is Laura Lennick. It's her first name's Laura, Laura. Her last name is Lengnick. And so if you go onto Amazon, put in the last name and put in food resilience, it's, I think, titled Food Resilience, looking from a climate reality, something like that. So she's got chapters on exposure, sensitivity, adaptive capacity, vulnerability. There's 20 case studies, and here's some part of it. She's really top notch. Oh, and by the way, she is going to be in the Collider as well. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thanks for being here.
Has left the conference.